Um, Today's class is, again, as I mentioned, that we're going to have a session that would look at, DevOps and data pipeline. And we're having, let me start recording the session actually.
Recording in progress.
Hi everyone. I want to welcome us to another day for PrepsNG, 20 days of SQL. It's been an exciting journey, which is gradually winding down. We only have a couple more days to go. And if you have shown up every single day since we started till now, I want to say thank you for constantly making it a date. It's been an absolute pleasure on my side, taking us through these interesting classes. I've also not been able to do this without the support of, people like Otumba, people like you know Fei as well. And also, today's session is very different. As I mentioned in one of the previous sessions that we've had, that we're going to have, someone come do like a demo of data pipeline and DevOps. We're also going to be able to take a few question and answer session before he leaves. He's a very seasoned tech professional in the United Kingdom. I would allow him to do a bit of introduction for himself when he comes live. But yeah, just as usual, we've gone through day one, day two, basic syntax in terms of select statements, aggregate functions, filtering. We've had several case study sessions, looked at lead code questions as well, looked at all forms of joins, looked at subqueries, set operations, views, and altering views. We've looked at Windows function. We've looked at CTs as well. We've looked at create table. I know that there are like two other things that we're left with, which is inserting data, which is more like inserting data essentially, and the conditional case when function, which I also mentioned that we're going to look at, which we'll do tomorrow unfailingly. And on the very last day, it will just be, answering lead code questions and also general question and answer session. Without further ado, I would like to invite Michael. Michael will do, an extensive introduction of himself, and also take us through data pipeline and DevOps as well. So, Michael, you have the floor, please. You can go on now with your session.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Michael, and I've been following up on the training course that Solomon organized. It's quite exciting. I have dropped in a few times to see what the class looks like, and having done that, I thought about being able to share some knowledge in terms of data pipeline and trying to merge the knowledge that we're all gaining from the SQL learnings, because over the time I've joined the class, I've also gained some additional SQL knowledge. That's like one of the reasons why I decided to join and take up the class. Yeah. Talking about my background, I'm currently working at London Stock Exchange Group as one of the lead DevOps engineers. My day-to-day involves trying to help manage the platform, trying to automate as much work as possible. And in automating as much work as possible, it entails me also automating data pipelines and doing some form of data engineering, I would say. So prior to doing data engineering, I did a little of data analysis at the beginning of my career. So I was able to gain some foundational knowledge in terms of data processing. So that kind of helped me in my everyday job and kind of helped merge the knowledge between like data and DevOps. So I'm sure some of you are wondering what DevOps entails. Let's see DevOps as basically mainly automation, because on the broader scale of things, DevOps includes like infrastructure cloud infrastructure, infrastructure as code, automation, CI/CD pipelines, and sometimes platform engineering. But the whole broader wide picture is more cloud native, because that's where most companies are heading towards now. Most companies are either in the process of migrating their workload from on-prem to cloud. And so for this demo session, I'll be utilizing AWS for most of the resources, which we'll be utilizing for the data pipe. I'm sure if everyone is familiar with working with AWS. Maybe I could get a few hands up if you have some idea of AWS or you have one or two on AWS. That would be helpful to see some level of understanding across the group. Okay, no hands up. Okay. So we'll take it up from there. So having understand that most of you has been like SQL servers and understand basic SQL commands, queries, joins, and filtering. I thought to take this a step further and basic automation like an everyday task and query, like just basically simple stuff that you have already done and things that you are used to doing. So let's take it straight up. Let me share my screen. Okay, so this is the AWS console, and what I've done is I saw the other day that some team members were trying to set up like a log database. But I was unable to do this database setup because I have access to AWS and also an AWS professional. So I have the opportunity of setting up my infrastructure on the cloud. This is also because I have some additional credits from AWS because I also work as an AWS community builder. Having set that up, just give it a few minutes to come up. Okay, so similar to what you have on your local with your SQL, you're able to create your database on the cloud on the fly as fast as possible. Most companies utilize cloud platforms for their database, and so because I have an idea of that, I was able to like quickly create my database. I had a chat with Solomon, and he shared me the data set that the team has been working with. And so I was able to then load it up to the database. So I'm not going to go in depth into like setting up this part. I think it's something we can do at a later time because I think today we're just focusing on the data pipelines, which is what I think we should focus on. So basic, simple understanding is when you run your queries, you're able to like get data across your database from multiple tables, columns, or whatever filtering mechanism you must have thought about or you have been given at work. Let's say an everyday task of say, Mr. Solomon, can you every day at 7 a.m. share the data of some business entity users, their first name, last name, email address, and the modified dates of that particular person? Probably they're looking at doing some scholarship or seeing who resumed work first or whatever the case may be, right? And because this is going to be a repetitive task, every day you can choose to come to your database, run your query for that day, get the file, export the CSV, and then email it to your boss, right? It's something you can do every day. And doing this whole process of coming into your database, getting your queries, right, exporting it as a CSV could take little between 30 minutes to an hour or slightly above if you're new into data or if you're having some form of issue which occurs every other day in IT, right? The plan of like a data pipeline is to help you run an everyday repetitive task in your database, or as a data engineer or as a data analyst, and make the work more and faster without you having to be there to the work done. I know that every day people talk about how AI is coming to take our jobs, but in reality, I think what is really taking most of it is really automation. Because if you look at it, most of the AI, you still have to automate them, how they work and how they process. Take a look at ChatGPT. The process of ChatGPT providing a response to you is simply an automated process, right? So let's not jump into that. I can show you what that looks like, but then let's come back to what we're looking at. So in a simple word scenario, right? If you run this query, okay, so in a simple word scenario, if you run this query across your database, it will provide you the data in which you have requested, and you can then go ahead to export it as a CSV and email it to your manager we talked about previously.
In progress.
Using Python 3.12. So additional configuration.
So sorry, it's like a pay-as-you-go something, or what? The Lambda function.
Yes. So the Lambda function is basically serverless, so it's pay-as-you-go. So it's only pay-as-you-go, only when your code runs and then you pay. The only limitation is Lambda functions can only run a single execution for 15 minutes. But in the real world scenario, 15 minutes is a long time for a single execution to run. So enterprise companies, at my company, London Stock Exchange, we currently use Lambda functions to automate most of our data pipelines, and it works as expected, managing tens and thousands and millions of data, right? Because we deal with a lot of customers, a lot of industries, so we tend to store data, and the department where I work, we kind of manage data from a CIM perspective, so user access and management. So I tend to deal with data of every user that interacts with the London Stock Exchange. So the Lambda function is perfect and suitable. It's very cheap, cost effective, rather than running like best servers. To interact with the database.
Sorry, rather than running what?
What do you say? Rather than running best servers like EC2 servers, Linux or Linux machines or Windows machines.
So those ones are not pay as you go?
No, you pay for whatever compute resource you have for your machine.
So how do you determine that, or the compute you're talking about? How do you determine, like, if a company now wants to, move to AWS server instead of their on-prem? How do you now know the capacity?
Yes, so that is for people in capacity planning, right? But off my head, right? If an application is running on-prem, right, and you're running on bare Windows servers, I'm sure you have an idea of how like data centers look from movies, or if you've seen one in real life, right?
Yeah.
You're running an application on a Windows server. Let's take a simple assumption. You're running an application on my Mac machine now, and my Mac is 4 gig, 16 gig, right? 4 gig RAM or 16 gig RAM. If the application is running as expected, fine, smooth on my 16 gig RAM, because it's on-prem, the ability to scale is very limited because you have to buy the machines technically, right? So you have to overestimate what your application is going to be utilizing. But the advantage of cloud, I'll show you something now. if you look at this general configuration for this Lambda function, I'm only utilizing 128 memory and 512 storage, right? I can easily bump it up whenever I feel like, depending on my usage of these particular Lambda functions, right? Depending on what kind of code is running, if I'm running a lot more higher data pipeline, doing multiple data processing, then I can easily bump it up. So this way you're able to like save cost. And with on-prem servers, you don't get the functionality of running serverless code across your cloud infrastructure. Wait, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Because normally what I know about AWS cloud server is meant to be scalable, right? So you pay as you go, like you said about Lambda. I didn't know that there were some parts that you have to actually ask for a particular storage size that you needed. I thought it was is scalable.
Running something small. Permit me to cut you there so that we don't take too much time in over that, right? So there are different types of like compute resource when it comes to like AWS, right? With the Lambda functions, they call it serverless in the sense that my codes are in here right now. They're not running. I'm not paying any dollar or any pound right now for the code being here. I can leave it here for 10 years and I will not pay any money. But if I have an EC2 instance, as long as it's running, I have to pay for every second that it's running. You also have the option of scaling your EC2 servers, your Windows servers, your Linux or Ubuntu servers, right? Whatever the case may be, you have the option of also scaling it depending on your use case. So that's the difference between the on-prem and the cloud. AWS, Azure, same thing. With the Azure, if you're familiar with Azure functions, Lambda functions, one and the same thing.
Okay, thanks.
So one and the same thing. Yeah. So back to our Lambda function, basically a simple web server that is able to help us deploy our code, like a code environment where we can write codes. With the Lambda functions, I'm using PrepsNG. So PrepsNG is just a simple library that is helping my Lambda functions to be able to interact with our database. So that way we're able to have an isolated environment of our data workbench where we can write queries. Right. And if we do like a simple architecture, so before I go to the architecture, and then the next part we'll be working with, I've showed the database, and then the next part is the S3. S3 is basically a file storage. So like your C drive on your local machine, S3 imitates the same thing. You can store compute data, you can store music, data files, whatever the case may be. So for this one, I created in an S3 bucket named Prep Data Pipeline. If you're familiar with Azure, so it's the Azure Blob Storage. So I've created a simple S3 bucket, and the purpose of this S3 bucket is we're going to be using a directory called the staging daily. So like we said, about the simple world use case where your manager asks you to send a particular data from the database daily. When you send it to his email, right? There's also, so with the cloud, you have the option of either sending it to his email. That's something more complex, but you can extract that CSV and have a daily dump of that file in this directory, which acts like a C drive. So your manager can easily come in here every day and pick it up the file daily without having to reach out to you. So less communication, less interaction, everybody gets the job done, everybody's happy. Multiple team members can also come in here, see what file they need to query and do what not. Next use case is the fact that multiple teams, right? So in a situation where you're working with the finance team and the admin team also needs a particular report, they can easily come into your S3, your AWS account or S3 and then pick up that CSV if they need it. Another use case is the fact that a different team, let's say the data engineering team, that they're doing some human tracking to feed the new AI system, right? they can create their own data pipeline that comes in here, picks up the file which you have dumped here, and then load it into their database or do additional post-processing on the data which you have provided for them. So that's like a simple basic use case. And lastly, we have like the CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is basically your monitoring system on AWS where you can see information about your executions, and then you're able to like add some print statements in your code to be able to like see how far your data has gone. In a simple example from that code, we can see that the connection to the database, you see that it was connected successfully. If there was an error, you'll be able to easily pinpoint, oh, this is where the error is. Similar to when you're connecting to your database locally. You can see how much rows were picked up. You can figure out that, oh, this now writing data to the storage account. And lastly, you can set up monitoring alarms whereby you can, if there's an error message, you get automated emails to let you know that there was a failure in a certain pipeline, and you can easily take action on. So for those that might be concerned about if it is a manual process, you're able to see what's going on, and then you can always come back to know what happened. But if it's automated, how then do you track if there are issues? So with the CloudWatch, you have the option of setting up alarms, and with alarms, you can set up queries based on setting parameters or strings. For instance, if it's failed to query, you can have that as one of your items to then know that, okay, it failed to query and to send an email to you. So that being said, let's dive right into what the script looks like. Like I said, we have the layers. If anyone that's looking to set up Lambda functions to test out like the data pipelines, I have a repo here. I'll share it in the chat where you can pick up multiple layers and attach to your Lambda functions. You don't have to create the layers yourself. If you're using a different type of database, maybe not MySQL, you're using DynamoDB or whatever the case may be, you have the option of also getting some layers to be able to interact with your database. I also have both the 3 clients to be able to interact with my AWS resources. So between line 6 and 20 is basically connecting to the database. And if you can see, I have been able to store the environment variables of the database. You can see the password, but I'll delete the database today, so I don't really have concern about that. The database connection string, database name, host, users, and every other environment variable that you want to store. So you can store them in your Lambda functions. Makes it quite easy and seamless, and you don't have to hard code it in your code. So if you look at this beginning part, it's basically just helping you connect to your database, right? And if you look here, it's printing starting handler, and it's also printing connected successfully. So if we look in our CloudWatch where we are tracking the process of our pipeline, we can see that it's connecting to this particular database, and that's also printed connected successfully. So that way you can easily tell, yeah, my connection to my database worked as expected. So now let's jump into it. So the same query that we have from the SQL Workbench is the same query I have in here, right? Because of the layer which I have added, we're able to query the database, extract this data, and then do additional processing like we talked about. So I'll walk through the code, and then we can test how the code runs, and we can come back to it. I also have some additional print statements. I'm able to fetch the rows. I'm fetching the rows of the query which was performed, printing out the rows. If you look in the CloudWatch, you'll be able to then see. These are just some additional features which I really like to add to the code to be able to debug a lot faster. For the prefix, getting the prefix of the file to be able to name the file accordingly. For this part, I'll come back to it and I'll show some more details into it. For the timestamp, basically just trying to timestamp your files for easier tracking, right? So if you see, I'm tracking it based on the year, the month, the day, and the dates, right, as well as the time. So that way, if there are any issues, we know that it was on this day, this time, 5:01 at 31 seconds that this file was generated. Just some additional process, but some companies might have like different naming conventions for how they like to track their data. So I think that can be company by company specific. Storing in the local part, what I'm doing is based on this query, I'm storing it in the local storage of the Lambda function, right? And from the local storage, I'm then uploading it to S3, right? To make it available to other team members and then make it automated and then returning a status code. So that's like the basic moving part of the code.
Sorry, if I may ask again, as a data analyst, right? Am I the one doing all these things you're describing? Or is that the DevOps engineer's job?
So not necessarily that you have to do it, but I always advise people to understand it and know it, which is why Solomon was also interested in me bringing the team on here. Solomon, I know personally, works as a data engineering professional. He doesn't have to do the work of a DevOps engineer, but you have to understand it to be able to better secure your job. I think that's the best word to use for it. To better secure your job, you have to understand it. As a DevOps engineer, I don't necessarily have to know SQL, right? But I have personally taught myself SQL, the basics of it. I don't do complex stuff. If I have to do complex stuff, I have a call with the data engineer or the data analyst, and I get all the queries I need, and then I can do the complex stuff. But I need a foundational knowledge just so I'm better useful at my job, right? So I'll give you a backstory. Recently, we're doing some migrations from Salesforce to a new system, right? And in moving from Salesforce to this new system, we have had to do some new data pipelines to be able to supply data, daily snapshots of the database from our database to the new team, right? While still supplying Salesforce the old data. Now, as a DevOps engineer, when the ticket came into the sprint, I could easily take it up because I have some idea of SQL and understanding of data pipelines and data engineering, regardless of if I'm just a DevOps engineer. That gives me an additional edge in my job to the fact that now that the project is taking off, going to the next level, I'm now the point of contact for my team for that job. Although we have data engineers on my team.
Okay.
So now I'm more of like a project lead for that particular task because I was able to like take responsibility for it.
Right.
Okay. Right. Mm-hmm. So with the Lambda functions, you have the option of. So I'm taking you through the steps of, first of all, manually invoking your code. So if you manually invoke this code, right? If we manually invoke this code, this is going to be as similar to what we do every day, where we come in here, type your query statement, and then invoke the code. So this is what you do manually, and this is what I've also done manually here. And this is what I've also done manually here. And testing it, you manually do your execution. When you do your execution, similar to what you do on your Data Studio or your SQL bench, whatever the case may be, and then you wait for the query to load up. When it loads up, is there a
difference between invoke and execution?
No, there's no difference.
Okay.
Right. So now it says succeeded, right? It gives me the response based on what I printed, and it gives us the exact time. So this is today's date, and the time is 19:07. Correct? Now, what this whole script has done is it has gone into the database, picked up this query, and run it against the database, create a CSV, and then upload it into our S3 bucket. Right? So into our S3 bucket, so the staging daily, and then we can see the file. So if we look at the time the file came in, it matches what the current time is, right? So this is like the idea of the whole. This is the idea of the whole data pipeline. So this is the basic idea of data pipeline, basically automating simple tasks and making it more automated so you don't have to do this process daily. Now, let's take it to the next step. So the next step involves...
Sorry for disturbing again. So as you've put it here now, subsequently, I don't have to run it. It's now automated because it's in this AWS.
I've not showed the part of automating it just yet. I only showed the part of manually executing the scripts, right? Which is similar to executing it manually.
But so I want to automate it.
What do you say?
I said, but the purpose is to automate it.
Correct.
Okay.
So we're heading there. So now, same process, what you do here. I've brought it into the cloud and I've executed it, gotten the CSV, dumped it in a file storage, made it available to multiple teams. Multiple teams can now come in at every day at, let's say, 9 p.m. and do some post-processing on the file. The data analyst can come in, pick up the file, do whatever they want to do. So those are like simple stuff that can be done. Situations where I have been able to automate it down to the process of creating your Power BI dashboards and pushing it to the team, right? So you can also utilize your Lambda functions to connect to a Power BI based on that data and make it available to the team in PDF. Lambda functions can do anything that you think about. Is the magic. It's basically a server that runs serverless, right? Now, we only get to pay for that single execution that we did. So that's like one part now. So now let's take it to the next part. So the next part now is basically we're trying to automate this flow, right? In automating this flow, we have the option of adding triggers to your Lambda functions, right? So triggers are basically automated ways of doing stuff. If you hear people say, oh, I pull data from the API, simple terms means that we can make our Lambda function accept parameters from an API. So when you call the API with the parameter of your SQL queries, it provides the same data that you require without having you to go into the database. There are other systems that can integrate into your Lambda functions. SNS, SNS is simply a notification service, so you can send a notification and it pulls data for you as easy as you want it. Kinesis is a data stream platform. But today we'll be integrating with CloudWatch Event Bridge. So I've already done some form of integration for that. So the CloudWatch Event Bridge is basically a system whereby you can have and set up cron jobs for your integration, right? Cron jobs basically saying, run this script every day at 8 a.m., run this script every 3 months, run this script once a year, or whatever the case may be, right? And to do this, I had to make some changes in the code. I'll show you the changes I had to make. So I'll comment out the part where we are manually inserting our query in the code, and I'll uncomment the part which accepts the query. So what happens in this simple part is, when this event bridge, right, based on this event bridge, based on this schedule, right? So now I set the schedule to run every 5 minutes, and it has shown me some times where it's going to run. You can change your schedule pattern. It can be every minute, it can be every hour, it can be day of the month, it can be day of the week, it can be every year, regardless of whatever the ask may be. You can always make those changes to your automated scripts, right? And what I've done is with the event bridge, just 1 second, let me reload this out. So with the event bridge, I took out the query from the code and added the query to the trigger, right? So when this triggers, it passes your SQL query as a parameter to the Lambda function in here. So when it gets the events, which this will then be the event, when it comes in, it gets the query from that event and runs the query, and then runs the query based on, and it executes the query based on what you pass as a parameter, right? So that being said, we can also add additional context like parameters, like the file name. We can change the file name. So the beauty of event bridges, we can have multiple event bridge running the same Lambda functions at different times, right? So we can have, I know we have had multiple queries, something about gender. We can have multiple event bridge running against the same Lambda functions, right? But all we just be doing is passing different parameters, and then we can also change the prefix of where the files will be stored or the name or whatever the case may be, right? So with this schedule, which is also a cron, what we'll be doing next is now not having to touch anything, but still having your data ready for you as fast as or at the right time which it is required by the team. Right. So in the event bridge, all I need to do is enable it. So now it's enabled, and then it shows us what the next schedule is. So it's running every 5 minutes, which we have set up as a cron expression, right? So while we wait for a few minutes for this to run, in the file storage, I'll show you what it looks like. So this is the last modified file. So query results at 2007, right? So back to its cron jobs automation. So now this is where automation comes in. Oh, you're being the one asking the question. Elizabeth, can you start sending the data of all the genders we have in the team on a daily report? We want to look at balancing out the gender across board because we noticed that there are less women in the company than men. Okay, boss. Because you don't want to have to do this every day, you make it easy. You automate it as fast as possible, right? Set up your simple Lambda function, connect to the database, set up your cron job, your rules, and then let it run for you while you sleep. So that way you can wake up at 10 a.m. and you're sure that your manager has gotten the file which he requested for. So while we wait for a few minutes, let's have an interactive discussion. Can we take in questions from anyone who might have one?
Hi, Mr. Market. Thank you so much for the in-depth lecture thus far. So I wanted to confirm, like, is this automation process, is this similar to, I think I've sent something like SQL jobs, whereby, they sort of automate processes using certain procedures and they set, timer for how frequent it should carry out that job. I think it's called a job in SQL.
Yes, that's also similar, right? It's basically automating it. Like, it's automating based on what the use case can be, right? So your simple SQL job will probably just run maybe stored procedures for you at the schedule, right? But I think at that point, that's limited to that particular ecosystem, if you understand what I mean. So it's basically running for you in your SQL environment. You can run your stored procs or run queries for you, but within your SQL environment, right? But when you're working in a company with other users, you're trying to integrate with multiple teams, right? You're trying to also be able to do more functionalities. That's where stuff like the Lambda functions can then come in for additional functionality, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay. Yeah, and also this environment you're running in, is it like the Python environment in AWS, or I'm just trying to understand.
Okay, so I'm running this code in a Python environment, right? But so if you go into create functions, right, from scratch, so you have like multiple runtimes which Lambda functions can run with. If you prefer to use PowerShell, .NET, Java, Ruby, whatever the case may be, right, you have the option of utilizing them. You even have the option of utilizing Linux for your Lambda functions, if that's what you are more comfortable working with.
All right, thanks. That makes sense. So I think that's like one of the benefits of using this cloud. You have access to multiple maybe APIs or whatever they are called, right?
Yes, correct. Right. So with cloud, right, you have the ability to utilize various cloud services on the fly, right, without having to be bothered about when next, like the word is the cost of ownership. So without having to be bothered about the cost of ownership, you can quickly do stuff. So a few days ago, I had a few friends and we picked up a hackathon, right? Basically utilizing Lambda functions for something new. And having gone over conversations with, this is also a data pipeline, right? But just maybe a little bit more complex. This is what ChatGPT does. When you pass in your query to the terminal, it might not be running on Lambda functions. It might be running on Kubernetes, but basically they are all compute services. That can pass your query to a Lambda function. Your Lambda function then can store your part of your parameters so that it has like your session key, session ID in like an S3 bucket. Transcribe is for when you pass in audio. I know some people can record audio to ChatGPT. With AWS Transcribe, you can convert your audio into text. Pass your text to Amazon Bedrock. For Bedrock runs on AI agents and AI, right? It can then get your query, gets information for you and pass the information back to you, right? So it's also a data pipeline. For this one, where I was doing with my friends, we're basically doing an automated accessibility system, right? Where users who are visually impaired, like blind, can go to a website, talk to their phone, and the phone can then automate controlling the website for them. So this is what we're working on for the hackathon. So, which is also a data ETL pipeline in a broader sense of things. I hope I did not confuse you there.
Nah, not too much confusion. We'll be fine.
Okay, so you see now our data is coming. 821 at 35. So this is basically what I mean by automating it. If you come into our CloudWatch, we can then look at the logs. Let's say, Mr. Dexter, we didn't get the data today. You can come into CloudWatch, have a look, and see, oh, at 8:20, this happened. The file was written, but why was the file not available? Oh, there was an error uploading the file, and then you can fix it. But technically, this is what a data pipeline, an automated data pipeline looks like, right? So this is what an automated data pipeline looks like. If you look back now, you see that the other queries were coming, the other data was coming in with the prefix of query results, but I changed it to email reports, right? If you look in the event rule, I changed the prefix. So you can pass prefix, you can pass whatever parameter you want to pass, utilizing like the event bridge. And this is also similar to what it is like getting data from APIs. when you're trying to interact with data through APIs, you also have to pass parameters. Most APIs are secure. More parameters you have to pass, like the API key or whatever, or the secrets or whatever the case may be, right? But in reality, you still have to pass parameters. I was telling Solomon about a use case of what I worked on recently. So for that use case, users are sending data to a particular email address, like a team DL, every day. That pipeline goes into the Outlook mail, picks up the data from the inbox, and then processes that data and adds it to the database. Although there are some pre-processing, like taking out some data and cleaning it up, right? But we utilize simple Lambda functions for such functionality, and that has been helpful. So if we look at our event rule, it's going to be running every 5 minutes. If that was the plan or the case, maybe every 5 minutes, a new report will come in to the team. You can also have your Lambda functions, the way we are using SQL queries to be able to pull out the data. You can also have your Lambda function go into your S3 bucket, get the data, and then load your database, whatever the case may be. Question in the chat, can you export the data from Lambda? Yes, we can in Kim. Yes, we can export the data from the database, which is exactly what we are doing here, and exporting it to a different file storage. So this file storage works like your C drive in your personal computer. Can we say Power Automate is a user-friendly version for Lambda functions? I don't have extensive experience using Power Automate, but I hear it's low code and it's quite user-friendly. I think, Solomon, you're a master in Power Automate. Do you want to shed some light in that?
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you're mentioning Power Automate, because I remember, Michael, when I was working on one Power Automate project was probably when we met. I was working with one company in America at the time, and yeah, that work almost had my life. But anyways, I would say that with Power Automate, you're correct, but the flexibility that you get with Lambda function, you don't get that with Power Automate. Also, the size of data that you can work with, you cannot particularly do that with Power Automate as well. It starts to slow down. Again, it's just like a form of low code system that works as well, but it's not as efficient as Lambda function, right? It's just like saying Excel can do what Python can do. Obviously Excel can do some basic things, but when it comes to the level of complexity of the analysis that you want to do with your data, then obviously Excel is going to be limiting. But yeah, Power Automate is just as nice as well, but not as powerful and flexible in terms of the operations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for that. Next question says, do S3 bucket have limited capacity? So S3 doesn't have limited capacity. I have an S3 bucket which I manage using, which is in terabytes of data. The beauty of cloud is the fact that you can scale on the go, right? You don't have to be bothered about what your 10-year storage is going to look like. At this point, AWS is going to be able to keep expanding the storage which you want. So S3 is technically limitless from my understanding.
But can you give us the difference between all of them? All the storage, to determine maybe what a company might want to adopt?
So in terms of storage, right? Cloud, AWS, Azure. If it's AWS, farm storage, S3 is the go-to in terms of like resource. S3 is the go-to in terms of resource. S3 can be used to deploy front-end, like basic front-end applications are deployed on S3. I can show you a basic front-end that I deployed on S3. Maybe I'm taking it too far because I see time is almost done.
Don't worry, we'll be patient.
Okay, so this is object URL. So this is a basic front-end application I'm trying to work on for the hackathon with my friends, right? The code for the front end is basically deployed on S3. Where's that? It's basically deployed on S3. So S3 is limitless. If you look back in here, for the voice nav, we have some audio transcripts, some MP3s, which those AI models I showed earlier are processing. We also have some transcribe outputs, which are like JSON formats. Right. If it's Azure, most teams go with blob storage. It's similar to S3, right? But if you're then going further into like data lake, you can use like Azure Data Lake or Data Lake in S3, but those are for like higher data processing activities like AI models and the likes. But in terms of like file storage, S3, in terms of database, we have various types of database. We have serverless. So there's the serverless one. There's the Aurora database. I can show you a few of them. There's the Aurora. Aurora is serverless and it's fully scales. You only pay for what you use. So if you only have 10 gig of data today, you only pay for 10 gig. Tomorrow, when it becomes 15 gig, you start to pay for 15 gig. There's Postgres Aurora, which is also serverless, MySQL, Postgres SQL, whatever the case may be, or the Microsoft SQL Server. Yes. So with cloud, you get the functionality of like being able to deploy at scale. So which is quite exciting. Also, if you want, there's also situations where you can have your data pipeline as part of your servers, right? So like your Linux servers. I know some of you are conversant with like Linux or Windows servers, right? You can have your data pipeline as part of your application, right? Running in the same server, helping you to do some additional processing. So in a situation whereby you're having to move data within the server, right? So if on your personal computer, you want to move data from your C drive to a particular folder every day, technically this is what we did there. You can also configure your basic laptop to be able to do that. That's going into like additional conversations, but with GitHub, I'm sure many of you are familiar with GitHub or GitLab. They have GitHub Actions, which is CI/CD, is the buzzword now. Everybody is talking about CI/CD. CI/CD is basically continuous integration and continuous deployment. What we have here, we can also imitate this with a CI/CD, and we can also set up our local personal computer as a CI/CD server to be able to do whatever data processing you want to look like, whatever you want to do with your code. I can show you what a sample CI/CD pipeline looks like, but it's still quite similar, but just slight different. Let me show this one. And this is written in YAML, right? What this is doing is looking for the deployment artifact that was built earlier, and then deploying it to a Windows server, preparing the artifact, doing some additional processing, unzipping it, retrieving some secrets from like the secret hub, changing some configurations in the files, and then deploying it to on-prem. So this is not even me deploying to on-prem. This is not me deploying to cloud, rather. This is me deploying to like on-prem servers, but it's the same idea if I was going to do the same pipeline that we have in the Lambda function on GitHub Actions, right? And GitHub Actions is free for your first 100 invocations every month. It's free. So it's something that you guys can always go back to and test, right? But the point I would like to make at the end of the day, like the key takeaway is the fact that your SQL skills are more powerful than you think, right? They are the heart of data engineering. Like knowing SQL is definitely a top of every recruiter's mind, right? And data pipeline basically just takes your simple SQL queries and make them automated and scalable. which is amazing. And if you have some additional time within you, you can go on to learn some basic cloud, which would also be helpful. So at this point, I would like to stop the class. And if we have any other questions, I can take that up.
So can you just do a summary of what you've said, like the step-by-step from, the manual to the automation? Just run through, without going into details. High level, please.
Okay. Solomon, can we do that real quick?
Yeah, by all means, please.
Okay. I think I saw one hand raised up. I can take that question before I go into that.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I just wanted to ask, is it also possible to deploy Lambda environment on Salesforce?
On Salesforce?
Yeah.
No. No, you cannot deploy Lambda on Salesforce, but you can interact with your Salesforce with Lambda.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just give a little brief explanation on that. The same way we're connecting to the database, right, from the Lambda functions, we can also connect to a Salesforce API via the Lambda functions and pull data from Salesforce into your AWS environment or whatever the case may be. Or if you want to send the data as an email or to another team, you can also do that with Lambda functions too. So yes, that's possible.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. So quick run through our basic SQL queries, automating them, going into AWS console, utilizing Lambda functions just because they're serverless. If you have some money to spend, you can also utilize real servers too. Utilizing Python Lambda functions, connecting to the database, getting your query from an automated trigger, which is a CloudWatch, printing your query, getting a CSV and uploading it to a file storage, which is similar to your C drive. So this is the run through of the Lambda functions. You also have to configure your environment variables, your database passwords, your bucket keys and the likes. And then lastly, your event rule, which is basically the automation piece of it, right? Where you can set up like your targets, your prefix for your buckets or whatever the case may be. Situations where you want to create a database for a different data on your regular schedule, you create a new CloudWatch event rule and you have that running for you automated without you having to do much work. And lastly, your CloudWatch to be able to see what your process or your pipeline is doing in case there are issues or failures. Lastly, the database, which is the RDS on AWS. I hope that was clear.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so any links for learning cloud? Oof, okay. Links for learning cloud. I always advise Udemy, Stephen Marek. I'll tell you a backstory. I think it was the year before COVID, 2019. Someone introduced me to Stephen Marek on Udemy, and it changed my life because he has helped me through my knowledge of AWS. I've written 4 AWS certifications, and he has taught all of them and has passed all successfully. So Udemy